Welcome to Building Toronto. I'm Peter Sobchak. The skylines of every major North American city all share a very consistent feature: tall buildings. And Toronto's no exception. We already have the second largest number of tall buildings in North America, behind New York City, and our ever-changing skyline may seem unrecognizable in a decade. For that, we can thank the condominium tower explosion. In this episode, we take a look at two new condo towers being built that, when complete, will leave a very distinctive mark on the city's skyline: Massey Tower and One Bloor.
The character of residential development has changed a great deal over the last decade, indeed the last 20 years. People think of residential high-rises, they sometimes think of the old style tower in the park, residential development, tower slab-like form that was built over a large green space that you can see across Toronto. More recently, we've really tried to focus on the way these buildings fit into the character of their neighborhoods, both in terms of tall buildings and mid-rise buildings. We've taken more effort to work with communities and developers to try to deal with the transition of these buildings into their urban setting.
Well, there really certainly has been a condo boom in the city of Toronto. It's one of the largest condo markets in the world. About 250 to 300,000 people per year are coming to Canada. About half of those are calling Ontario home, and about 80 to 100,000 people a year are coming to the Greater Toronto area. We've also had, I think, really positive policies from the province of Ontario and the city of Toronto to encourage more compact forms of development, more high-rise, high-density form of living. We've also seen employers choosing to locate their offices in downtown Toronto. So the idea of living close to where you work and play as kind of a lifestyle choice, I think, is really strong.
They want to be able to work in the city, live in the city, and shop in the city. And people are tired of commuting. They're tired of having a kind of a long-distance relationship with the city. And so people are migrating back towards cities. And there's a huge demand, and that's, I think, what's fueling the condo market.
The One Bloor site, when we first looked at its development potential, we really saw it as an extension of what was already started in the city of Toronto with the condo boom. Phenomenal site in its, first of all, in its location. You can't get any more center ice than Yonge and Bloor in Toronto. It's on two transit lines, the Bloor and Yonge lines. It's close to Yorkville, all the great shopping along Bloor Street, the University of Toronto. It's also an office node. When people from around the world are thinking about an investment in Toronto, they also know Yonge Street. They know its history, they can see the retail on it. We're also blessed with a zoning that permitted 75 or 80 stories high. Phenomenal views in every direction because of its location and because of the height that it was granted in zoning. So in terms of how it will stand out in the marketplace, a very iconic building, very iconic architecture.
The key design elements are to mark this as a significant intersection, I guess one of Canada's major intersections, and to somehow distinguish this as being a significant intersection within the city. And we were asked to create something that was iconic, something that would really distinguish this within the marketplace. The project is designed to fit within the city's guidelines for tall buildings, which really focus on the idea of a base. And it has a tall tower floor plate, which is very small and compact, so that as light and sun moves across the tower, the shadow impact is minimized because the upper floor plate is smaller. It's a 6-story podium, and the overall height of the tower is 75 stories. So it's one of the tallest residential buildings in the city and, in fact, Canada.
Some of the other features are the way the building is designed from the outside in. It truly is a piece of sculpture. It's a very unique location. It deserved a very iconic kind of shape. It's not another square, boxy building.
As you approach the building, the first thing that you would notice is that it has a very different configuration than any other building in the city, in the sense that it is not a rigid orthogonal geometry. It's actually in the podium, which is the base of the building. It has a sculpted, flowing profile as opposed to a kind of a rigid geometry. I think that's one of the first things that you would notice approaching the building. And we took that idea of shaping and sculpting the podium, we took that right up into the tower so that you see a lot of the balconies have been shaped and they have a configuration that is also very unique. And one of the things that's interesting about a high-rise tower is that you experience it from the bottom looking up. And as you look up, you will actually see the shaped profile of each balcony, and it'll create this whole sculpted form at the intersection.
Sensuous, beautiful curve lines on the building that you will see and read on the skyline at nighttime. You can say, I live at One Bloor. Not only will people know the address, they'll know what the building looks like from the outside. It'll be very distinctive on the skyline.
The material palette that we selected for the project includes very, very clear glass at the base. It's a low iron glass that allows a lot of transparency and view in. And then as you move up through the tower, the balconies, the shape is defined by a fritted glass, which has a milky white appearance, which actually allows you to view through the glass, but it also has a surface to it so that when you look at the glass, you see an actual solid surface, which helps to define the shape of the building. And then as you extend up through the tower, we've got curtain wall and fritted glass on the balconies.
Curtain wall is a type of glazing that you use primarily in office buildings, and it's incredibly rare to use them in residential.
And what we did was we actually carved away at the fritted glass to bring forward the curtain wall surfaces of the actual units and the buildings themselves. So the balconies are the wrapper that give the form to the building, and within the back edge of the balcony is where you get the curtain wall surface that is the actual glass into the unit. And we've opened up and sculpted the tower itself so that there's a combination of balcony surface with the fritting on it and a combination of curtain wall surfaces where you're actually looking at the units.
The kind of materials that we're using, much larger sheets of glass, higher performance type of glass, and the kind of views that it provides from inside to outside is really something quite special. But we also looked at the features of what's it like when you arrive. What is the arrival experience like? Very impressive lobby, not only its scale, but in its materiality, its finishes, the way it looks and feels. It's also a very sculptural kind of experience as you arrive.
One Bloor residents will have access to a whole amenity floor on the roof of the podium overlooking Yonge Street, and it will consist primarily of a pool, terraces, there's an adjacent spa, and exercise room.
Close to 40,000 square feet of indoor and outdoor space. You can be inside swimming in the pool and swim to the outside. Really lush planted gardens, true spa, hot and cold plunges, ice baths, like just a really phenomenal kind of spa facility in this building.
And I think it's one of the interesting things about podium buildings is that they often have these large roof surfaces in this area that allow for amenities to flow out from the tower into the podium roof.
There are people who are going to be first-time buyers looking for something smaller, more affordable. It's their first home. And then also much larger suites. There's quite a range. We look at the suite interiors, the size of the spaces, the size of the proportions of the rooms, the quality of the materials that go into each of the suites. Not just the floors and the countertops and the cabinetry, but the usability of the space, the flexibility of the space.
What we've seen traditionally is that the retail along Bloor has worked from the intersection of Bloor and Yonge, and it's gone west towards Bay Street, and I think this will help the retail cross the street, activate the east side of Bloor, and extend retail further along. We've also connected the subway at 33 Bloor to Yonge Street via a pathway that goes through the base of the building. So we've kind of made a link from Yonge to the south entrance to the Bloor Street subway station that didn't exist before. We've actually provided that in the base of the One Bloor Tower. I think in the last few decades there's been a higher degree of design interest that we've seen coming from clients, coming from the public. When we're at meetings with communities, there's always an expectation that what we're presenting is of a high quality design. We see our institutional clients expecting a higher quality of design as well as our retail clients. And I think in response to that, architects have risen to the call for better design, and there's just a greater range and a greater understanding and appreciation of design.
It'll be one of the tallest buildings in downtown Toronto, tallest residential buildings. Massey Tower is a 60-story condominium building near Queen and Yonge in downtown Toronto, which integrates the historic Bank of Commerce building that was built in 1905. There are approximately 700 units in the building. It'll be one of the tallest buildings in downtown Toronto, tallest residential buildings. And it's designed by Hariri Pontarini Architects, who's I think one of the best residential architects in Toronto.
The first thing that you would notice at the base of the building is the Heritage Bank building that's been preserved and forms the base of the tower. And right beside the Heritage Bank, you'd notice a glass pavilion, which is a retail pavilion. Back up and you look up towards the sky, and that's where you would see the tower.
The building is made up of three main components. There's the lower level, which has the historic building, which is 4 stories, which will be retained in its entirety. Above that, as we can see on the model over there, we've got a portion of the building which is a podium that will be above grade parking. Above that will be 2 levels of amenities with a roof garden on the 10th floor overlooking the entire city. And then we've got 50 residential floors above that.
The development site is actually surrounded by heritage properties, and they're all very significant. There's the Elgin and Winter Garden Theatre, which is owned by and operated by the province. There's the Heinzman Building right to the south, which is a very important commercial building from the same period as the Bank of Commerce. The Bank of Toronto to the north. Massey Hall, the concert hall and theatre built for the city by the Massey family, is the most important building on the block.
The other aspect of it that makes it a very interesting development is that we will be donating a portion of our land to Massey Hall, which would allow them to finally renovate and do an addition to their historic concert hall and bring their building into the 21st century.
The Bank of Commerce building was built in 1905 at a time when this stretch of Yonge Street was the commercial center of the city. The building itself was designed by Darling and Pearson, who were one of the leading architects in the city at the time. The building was built in the Beaux-Arts style, which was a very current style of the time, neoclassical, imposing, very representative of what a bank should be and how it can contribute to the city. It closed about the time when the Eaton Centre had opened, a lot of businesses on Yonge Street had closed, and the shift was to the mall-like uses of the Eaton Centre. And so when the building closed, there was a lot of interest about what would happen with this building because it was an iconic bank building. Directly north of it is the Bank of Toronto, which is also a very significant building. The Bank of Commerce sold the property to the City of Toronto, and an easement was put on it, and it was vacant from 1987 to the present.
When the city decided back in the 1980s to call this the theater block and look at the block as a reinvestment area, one of the first things they did was they bought this bank, they bought the old Bank of Toronto building, and they bought the Colonial Tavern in between the two of them. They demolished the Colonial and put in what was supposed to be a temporary parkette.
The City of Toronto had envisioned that this park space would become a new arrival or entry point to the various facilities of the theater block. That idea never really materialized, and so we are left with the vacant parkette.
The city was looking at ways to revitalize the block, and the idea was that they would encourage historic preservation, particularly of the theaters, and encourage new development that would be compatible with the existing buildings. The site did come available a couple of years ago, and we bought it in January of 2012 with the idea that we could do a residential development on the site. I decided that we would use the same team that we had used on 5 St. Joseph, which included HPA as the lead architects, ERA as the heritage architects, Ciccone Simone as interior designers, and Janet Rosenberg as landscape architect. I think all of them brought incredible sophistication and talent to this project.
For us, Massey Tower is critical in terms of city building in that it completes the block, and it is really a block that has suffered over time following the construction of the Eaton Centre, which drew a lot of life from Yonge Street into the mall. And I think that this project, along with a number of other projects along that strip, will help bring that street back to life.
The project got its name, obviously, as a type of homage to the Massey family, who historically did so much for the city of Toronto, not just Massey Hall, but also Massey College, Hart House. And what we wanted to do was honor the family by using their name. And we approached the family and asked for permission. I think they were thrilled from the point of view of us helping Massey Hall, which is now not connected with the Massey family, but is a nonprofit which is owned by the same group that owns Roy Thompson Hall. The Massey family was very happy to support a project that would be helping the historic hall.
I think it reflects the kind of current issues that architects are facing in the city as the larger development sites have been used up. The Massey Tower site was one of the most complicated sites we've ever had to deal with, and I think it reflects the kind of current issues that architects are facing in the city as the larger development sites have been used up and the smaller, more complicated sites are becoming the new norm. And I think what we had to do was work very carefully with all of our neighbors and actually complete the block.
In the past, most residential developments had a lot of parking. They included particularly underground parking. On a site that is this restricted, we're doing minimal parking and the above grade elevator parking. I think by the fact that now it has become more normal for people not to have the expectation of having a parking spot, helped unlock the site that allowed us to proceed without the kind of parking numbers that most projects used to have. I think being also on the Yonge subway with the Queen entrance, literally steps from the front door, also helped from that point of view.
The property between the two banks will become a retail space, but it will in fact keep the bank to the north, the Bank of the Toronto, completely open and exposed from the south.
What David Pontarini, the architect, felt would be the appropriate response to how we would use that space, given the architectural significance of the two limestone banks flanking that space. He designed a very light and airy glass pavilion that will house retail right on the street. We've always paid a lot of attention of designing it right at the beginning that it would have great retail. If these projects have retail, you've got to design the building from scratch so that they really do meet the street in a very positive way. I don't think we want any more dead spaces on Yonge Street. I think we want to have retail, we want to have vitality, and I think that that glass pavilion, which helps give a transition to the tower behind it, will create that.
With Massey Tower, we're using the bank building as the entrance pavilion to the condo, so it will actually be the lobby and the arrival point for residents.
So the building itself was on a top 10 list of most endangered buildings within the city. Many people walk by it, but wonder what it is, why it's not being used. And so the challenge when we came to the project was how we overcome that. Not just the technical issues of how to improve the building, but how do you overcome that situation where an amazing building that had been actively used becomes a derelict, almost pariah among buildings within the city. Because the building is so interesting and iconic, the idea was developed that we would use it as a sales center. So we've worked with the designers of the sales center to alter it and conserve it and reopen it as an active building on the street. There were repairs to the exterior, the windows and doors were refurbished and painted. Plaster work on the interior, which is very beautiful, has been restored. And actually there's an amazing marble mosaic floor that was uncovered. It had been covered over for 50 years with linoleum, and all of that was peeled back and the marble mosaic floor has been re-exposed. So if you go into the sales center today, you can see a lot of the original features of the bank.
What we're really trying to do is to distinguish the tower from the bank by using a completely different contemporary modern vocabulary and material palette. So the tower itself is a glass tower, whereas the bank is a stone, traditional stone bank building. And the Massey Tower is an all-new technology, all-new material, all-new glass, fritted glass panels, which are also quite new technology. And all of that new material palette helps us to really differentiate ourselves and to set ourselves apart from the traditional bank in a very respectful way. When you look up at Massey Tower, what you would see is a series of undulating balconies that alternate in terms of their profile. It was a study about how to give the balconies an architectural form which would give Massey Tower a distinctive profile in the skyline of the city.
I think that when the architectural critics or the public in general has problems with new developments, a lot of it is fear of change or fear of heights. 60 stories, 10 years ago would have been seen as a super tall building. Now it almost seemed modest and compared to some of the recent proposals for 80-story buildings. I think it does come down to design, not just of the tower itself, but how does it meet the street? And what does it do for the streetscape at the end of the day?
There's a real back to the city movement in Toronto. You see great interest in people wanting to live in the city for various reasons. There's greater transportation access, subways or streetcars, bus system. They can move about the city, they've got greater transportation choice, and of course we're trying to improve and build on the transportation system. I think people are attracted to city living. The day-to-day life of being able to walk instead of drive a car, the choice that you have, the shopping that's close by, the employment opportunities that are in the city. People are attracted as well with the environmental choice that they can make with their own life and the enjoyment that they can have with their family in an urban setting.
The skyline of the City of Toronto has changed dramatically over the last 20 years that I've been practicing architecture. You drive in along the Gardiner and it's completely different. It's more vibrant. It's, I think, more interesting. It really reflects the kind of cosmopolitan urban nature that Toronto has grown into, and I think that we as architects have a huge responsibility to ensure that the quality of the architecture and the design of these buildings is at a very high level, and I think that the development industry at the same time has a huge responsibility to be patrons of good design, because I think that that's critical in terms of our objective to create an amazing city to live in and a beautiful city to actually look at as well.
The current condo boom is really changing the face of Toronto. I think we'll look back in 10 or 20 years and we won't recognize the city. It'll change quite considerably. The impact is felt in neighborhoods in different ways depending on where you are in the city. So the face of change will be more gradual and incremental in some areas and be more significant, certainly in an area like the downtown.
Our skyline is a work in progress, but one thing is clear. As the city grows and evolves, we will need tall buildings to accommodate the people and the jobs being drawn to the core. This is why the city has embraced tall buildings as a defining feature of our downtown. I'm Peter Sobchak. Join me next time on Building Toronto.